shortly. Welcome to SOSA. Thank you for joining. We'll begin shortly. Welcome to SOSA. Thank you for joining. We'll begin shortly. Welcome to SOSA. Thank you for joining. We'll begin shortly. Welcome to SOSA. Thank you for joining. We'll begin shortly.
Hi, hello everyone, and thank you for joining us. Welcome to our event, which is a collaboration between the Foreign Trade Commissioners Association in New York, the FCTA Forum, and SOSA. I hope that all of you are well and fine. My name is Guy Franklin, and I'm the Managing Director of SOSA New York Innovation Hub, which was also chosen by the City of New York to run the official Global Cyber Center of the City of New York in partnership with the NYC DC, the New York Economic Development Corporation. We are happy to partner today with Dan Benson, which we will hear from him in a minute. I will tell you a bit about SOSA, and then we will hear from two of SOSA's experts. SOSA is a global open innovation company building pragmatic cross-vertical innovation programs. By curating advanced technology solutions and innovation models, SOSA works with corporations and public entities such as governments, cities, to implement innovations in order to scale and achieve successful digital transformation and to support tech ecosystems around the world. You can see on the screen now a few examples of entities, corporates, government, cities that we are working with, from the City of New York to CNI in Brazil, to the CTA, which is the Canadian Technology Accelerator in Canada, the Australian Landing Pad, which we will hear from Omri in a minute, about what it's all about, and so on, and other corporates from the insurance, banking, finance world, and so on. And SOSA Innovation Centers in Tel Aviv, New York, and London support its open innovation programs and serve as a meeting place for the widespread network of key industry stakeholders, which include over 15,000 startups and over 250 investors, venture capital funds, and leading international corporations. Today, we will hear from William Altman, our Senior Innovation Analyst, who will give us an overview about the New York tech ecosystem, mainly in this period of time, and the new trends and investment and what's going on in New York in the last few months, which is very interesting to see, as opposed to what all of us used to see in the last few years. There is a change. And we will hear also from our Head of Government Partnerships at SOSA, Omri Wishlitsky, who will share with us how governments and cities deploying innovation and support their entrepreneurs. Before that, and without further ado, I would like to hand the virtual mic to our partner to this event, Dan Benson. Dan, to say a few words, please.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Guy. And first of all, thank you very much to SOSA with our great appreciation for putting on this event today. You're not partnering with Dan Beggs, you're partnering with the Foreign Trade Commissioners Association in New York, which is an alliance of over 100 trade and investment promotion agencies from around the world. both country and regional level. We have over 50 or around 50 of our members joining us today, which I'm very happy about. To you, FTCA people, if you're new, welcome. And if you want to get in touch with me to find out more about FTCA, please do. With that said, thanks again, SOSA. Let's continue the program.
Okay. Thank you, Dan. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And our first speaker from SOSA is William Altman.
And there you go.
Which, as I mentioned, our senior innovation analyst, who will share his views on what's going on in New York City these days. William, the stage is yours. And everyone enjoy the event. Thank you.
Thanks, Guy. Hopefully everyone can hear me. I'll just share my screen here real quickly. Okay, great. Like Guy mentioned, I'm a senior analyst here at SOSA in New York City. So I work with corporations and governments to try and design and execute open innovation strategies that lead to buying, partnering, and investing in the right companies and new technologies. And so I'll give us a brief overview today of what I've been seeing in the ecosystem over the last couple months, some new lessons that may be applicable for the long term in the city. As you know, the city shut down. Mayor de Blasio announced the possibility of that shutdown on March 17th. And it's really clear that the coronavirus has had a dramatic impact on the city's startup ecosystem. From the wholesale evaporation of entire companies, really, to others who are fighting to pivot their businesses and more who are laying off employees to survive, the virus is undoubtedly taking its toll. So I want to draw your attention right now to a recent report by the Center for Urban Future and Tech New York City. It's called Tech Disrupted: How Coronavirus is Challenging New York City's Tech Sector. And the report offers some details about the impacts of the coronavirus based on interviews with nearly 24 founders, executives, and investors and industry leaders. So just to kick us off a little bit and set the stage, I want to walk through a few of the report's biggest findings. And so it's not really surprising that retail, hospitality, travel, and entertainment, and any of the startups in those industries that are dependent on those industries for business have been the hardest hit. In fact, the report's authors analyzed 2018 data from a startup database called Crunchbase, and they found that more than 3,000 New York City startups operate in just these couple sectors, and they're all at risk. But the research goes on to show that it's far from just startups in these sectors that are actually in trouble. And we see that unpredictability, volatility, and general disruption are actually shaking the financial markets and the advertising industry to their core. And in turn, thousands of New York City tech companies are suffering as a result of their close relationships to the city's bedrock industries. The report's analysis of data, again from Crunchbase, revealed that there's roughly 1,500 tech-enabled startups in the city in the finance sector, and roughly 950 to 1,000 in advertising. They're all struggling. Now, I don't want to just be doom and gloom here, because there is hope. Experts are actually touting the city's continued ability to generate a sizable portion of the world's most valuable companies, these unicorn companies. Others are saying that the city's current situation could lead to new and unforeseen opportunities for startups. And as we'll soon see in the upcoming slides, a number of interesting companies are actually thriving during this time, raising money, hiring, and growing faster than ever before. So let's take a look here at some of the funding activity data over the last, since 2016, really, by quarterly basis, to give us more of an objective look at really how the impact, or how the virus is impacting the tech ecosystem in the city. So here we see some nice data from CB Insights, great startup database. And we can see that this chart is depicting the private market funding activity in terms of deals and dollars that are going to New York City-based companies, and that we're just at the start of being able to objectively identify the impact of the virus on this space. you can see that the number of deals remained relatively constant over the time period in the range of 260 to just over 300 deals each quarter in this space. Now, the dollar amounts invested have trended upward over time with a clear peak in that second half of last year. So we're really going into this crisis with a fairly strong tech ecosystem in the city, especially relatively speaking to other places in the country and the world, right? And that relatively high deal count that we see in Q1 2020 is likely the result of deals that were actually underway at the end of 2019, closing at the start of this year. So as we're almost through Q2, the numbers are beginning to show signs of a downturn. And although more data and more monitoring of this trend is needed to fully assess and understand the situation, we're keeping an eye on it for sure. What is notable is that even during these times of crisis, there are lots of deals being made. Companies in some industries are dying while others are pivoting, innovating, and even thriving. You can see based on this chart that over $2 billion was poured into New York City startups since the city shut down in March. And in those deals, we can find signals that give us a glimpse into the city's future technological ecosystem. So one of those deals went to a company called Via Transportation. Via was founded in 2012 by Israeli entrepreneurs Daniel Ramon and Oren Shoval. The service is based on the founders' experience with shared taxis in Israel, and the company is an operator of on-demand transit networks that are designed to provide carpooling services. The company actually raised a $200 million Series E round of venture funding on March 30th, 2020. The company's pre-money valuation from that deal was close to $2 billion. So part of the funding is actually being used to expand this company's efforts around the novel coronavirus outbreak, which includes emergency services, transit network optimization, and elsewhere. But what's really interesting is that the deal highlights the fact that cities are increasingly seeking to rapidly adapt their existing transportation systems to address the COVID-19 health crisis. Cities like New York are in urgent need of innovative solutions for transporting essential employees, such as healthcare workers, essential goods, meals, groceries, medical supplies, and much more. So companies like Via that seek to implement optimized transport networks of the future, it's really a perfect time to be putting this technology to use and seeing what it can do to help places like New York City. We'll take a look at another company here called ASAP. It's a New York-based artificial intelligence software company that helps call centers work better and faster. It essentially analyzes the call of a call center's most efficient agents and then sends real-time suggestions to other agents to kind of improve their productivity and efficiency. The company raised a $185 million Series B round of funding on May 1st, 2020. The pre-money valuation was at $650 million. And the money is basically going to be used to help ASAP scale its operations at a time when many organizations are experiencing higher than ever customer interactions. And at the same time, they're at an all-time low in terms of their capacity to staff call centers and deal with those customer interactions. So any sort of company like ASAP that's going to be able to help improve that customer touch point across organizations and industries is going to see a lot of interest in its technology during this time. We'll take a look at another company here called Calibra. Calibra is a cross-organizational data governance platform. Basically what it does is it helps you it allows your company and helps you to break down traditional data silos that sort of open up the organization to new types of business intelligence. It's interesting, Calibra was actually a spin out from Vrij University in Brussels, Belgium. Today it's based in New York City and it works with some 450 enterprises and other large organizations. Its customers include Adobe, Verizon, the insurer AXA, and a number of different healthcare providers. The company raised $112.5 million Series F venture funding on March 12th, and it's valued at just over $2 billion. So, although painful, today's disruptions are actually offering many organizations an opportunity to re-examine why they do things. They're using the crisis for good, essentially to become better. And as organizations with established data governance practices and trusted data are better positioned to make these types of decisions that will ultimately determine their survival, so too are companies like Calibra rising to help meet that challenge. So another area that we're seeing a lot of interesting investment activity and a lot of interest among both corporates and investors is in cybersecurity. This trend has been rising steadily since around 2016, but really now with this shift to remote work and the increase in threats related to a digital and remote workforce, we're seeing a doubling down effect in cybersecurity. So you can see here Axionis and Sempris are both Israeli companies. The rest of these companies are New York based. Well, they're all New York based, but Axionis and Sempris came from Israel. So it's kind of interesting to see that the ecosystem there is continuing to funnel innovations in cyber across the world. So very interesting things happening there. Another space that we're seeing lots of interest is in digital health, unsurprisingly, right? We're seeing increased demand for remote healthcare capabilities and really at a rapid pace and on a global scale. The pandemic is most probably going to be remembered as one of the major catalysts for adoption for digital healthcare technologies and especially telemedicine. Companies that have obtained funding in this space since March are enabling remote care through virtual home visits. They're enabling providers to deliver better and more personalized digital health care, and they're using mobile devices and wearable technologies to monitor and assess human health in real time and much more. There's another group of companies that's seeing a lot of interesting activity around investment and corporate interest these days. And I just called them pandemic pivot investments, but I think the name is sort of still up for grabs. The idea being that these businesses are just now getting seeded or hitting their growth stage solely to enable other companies in this space or in multiple spaces to thrive and pivot and adapt to the new realities that we have in front of us. So for example, a company like PathSpot is currently being used in restaurants to help employees identify whether or not they have pathogens or viral-borne illnesses on their hands. Basically, they wash their hands, they shine it under some light, and if there's a detectant of some sort of viral bacteria, they go back and wash their hands again, right? So that's going to be deployed probably not only in restaurants, but really all over the place. A similar company, Somatic, is creating industrial cleaning robots for bathrooms and commercial buildings using AI and VR technology. We see another interesting company, Kaiklo, basically allowing previously offline retailers and wholesalers who were dependent on foot traffic to set up e-commerce websites. Axio, a company here helping organizations understand their risk around cybersecurity when it comes to protecting their remote workforces. First Base, I think we're going to see tremendous growth from this company. Essentially allows companies to provision, supply, and manage all the physical IT assets that they need to provision out to their remote workforces. And then here we see another Israeli company, Lily, taking advantage of the idea that we're about to see a lot more freelancers enter the economy, and we're about to see a lot of companies taking advantage of freelance work, just by nature of the fact that so many skilled people have lost a job and are out there in the market. So Lily's well positioned to help companies take advantage of that and open up financial services for those types of employees. So those are three big areas where we're seeing lots of interesting innovation happening and lots of growth and sort of counter to the overall trend of disruption in the city. So we'll go through three different areas where I think the city is going to see rapid adoption of new technologies from a government and a corporate side. The first one is obviously contactless payments. The idea being that people don't really want to touch a lot of foreign surfaces anymore. And if so, they want hand sanitizer right by them. And so why not just make it contactless? And the city had actually been exploring this opportunity with its Omni system operated by Cubic Transportation out of California. And it's going to be rolled out in the subway systems. People can basically just walk by and using a number of different technologies, kind of tap their smartphone or their key fob, etc. And I think we'll see this technology, sort of take hold in the subway systems and then be rolled out across a lot of different use cases in the near future. We're also seeing things like contact tracing systems. And contact tracing, for those of you who don't know, is when health officials can get in touch with people or a person who's been tested positive for the coronavirus and notify others who they've kind of come in contact with. So it helps stop these outbreaks early. And we're seeing that New York City has actually contracted the cloud communications company Twilio to provide and manage the servers and the software that can help keep track of individuals and then power the city's communication efforts to get in touch with people when they need to. So very interesting partnership underway between the tech world and the government world to explore the future of contact tracing here in New York City. And finally, we're also going to see lots of different symptom sensing technologies rolled out across the city. One company, SOSA Technologies, makes this terminal that you can see on the screen here. Essentially looks like a metal detector you can walk through, and they can tell you different vital signs that may lead to them determining that you should go get a coronavirus test, and at the very least can prevent outbreaks in potentially crowded venues or different areas where lots of people are together, kind of help us stop those outbreaks early. So that just concludes this brief overview of some of the new technologies and innovations that are taking hold just in the last couple months here in New York City. And if I can summarize, it would be that things are tough. There's obviously lots of companies that won't survive this, but there are many companies that will pivot, and some companies will even grow and thrive as a result of this current situation. So we're tracking this in real time and speaking with experts on a daily basis to make sure that we have an understanding of where this new reality could be headed. And if you're interested in learning more or getting in contact with us, don't hesitate to reach out. Thanks for your time. I'd like to hand it over now to my colleague, Omri.
Thank you, William. I hope everyone can hear me, and I'm gonna take over your screen now. You gotta stop sharing for a second.
Yep, one sec.
Okay, that's great. So, thank you everyone. Thank you, William. Thank you, Guy. Thank you, Dan. It's such a pleasure for me to speak to this organization. As previously, in my previous role until recently, really only 4 months ago, I was part of the Australian Trade and Investment Commission. So I'm very well aware of everyone's roles and the kind of organizations you work for, and a very important mission that you guys are all serving for your countries to support economic growth, and specifically around innovation. And I know how interesting it is in New York, and especially right now. And I wanted to share with you a bit of my background and a bit of the things that I've been doing to help you maybe learn of some of the opportunities out there. So currently I'm the head of government partnerships at SOSA. I basically manage a few of our partnerships with the Australian government, with the Basque region in Spain, as well as with Brazil, which I'll discuss later. And in my former role, I was the Australian landing pad manager in Tel Aviv. And that's one thing I wanted to discuss with you today. How do governments really, support innovation? What are the different strategies for governments to support innovation? That's a big question, and I know that you all are contemplating about and talking about, and you're hearing your members of parliament talking about. I see it mainly as there's two main ways that governments support innovation. Or they support the startups, which means, okay, we want to help our startups become more globally successful, bigger, grow, and then they can create more jobs. That's one thing. And the other way is kind of like the corporate support. Governments that are understanding that the corporates are, very important for the economy, and we want them to stay more innovative. So it's more of like in-country growth, staying innovative and maintain leadership positions for many of these corporations. And I want to give you two kind of examples. And the first one, released from my previous job as the Australian landing pad manager. a bit about Australia for those of you who don't know. It's a pretty big place. Takes you 6 hours to fly all the way here from Sydney to Perth, which is for us in Israel, it's like from Israel to London. Australia is a very successful country. It's a pretty successful economy with only 24 million people. It's between the 12th and 14th largest economy in the world. Depends what year you look at. But one of the major major reasons for its success is the fact that it's based on natural resources. So really, in all of these areas where people live in Australia, there are a lot of natural resources, and that's a very big chunk of the economy, as well as university, higher education, and financial services. But in 2015, when there was elections in Australia, the selected prime minister back then, Malcolm Turnbull, he was the first one to come and say, from like a prime minister, from a government representative, say, we want to invest more in innovation in our country. And what they did was very interesting. They created a very big program called the National Science Innovation Agenda, which was a $1 billion program, Australian $1 billion, not US dollars. And the idea was, okay, how can we help with the different elements of innovation in our country so we become a more innovative economy? So what can we do with academia and commercialization? What can we do with investments? And what can we do with startups? And the good thing they really did is they went out and they spoke to companies. They spoke to the ecosystem. They spoke to founders, to venture capitalists, to all the accelerator programs, and tried to understand what is the main problem today, back then in 2015. And they understood that there's a very, very basic problem for Australian founders. And it's something that a lot of the founders in your countries, and I'm sure a lot of you are going to find it relevant. They found that they are very locally faced. The founders there have a pretty sweet market. I mean, it's 24 million people. And if you build a successful business for 24 million people, you can be very successful. But when you want to build an innovative economy, when you want to build an economy that's going to succeed and grow over the years, you can't rely only on the internal crowd, and you need to build more global companies. And unfortunately, we haven't seen many Australian startups go and kind of like take the global stage. You might have heard of a company called Atlassian, which is a great example, which is a very successful company, came out of Australia, and there was a few others, but compared to the size and to many other aspects, it's pretty much not enough. And that's when they decided, okay, we want to create a program, and we want to help our companies, our startups, scale globally. And that's what led in 2016 to create the Landing Pads program. You're all welcome to, if you just Google Australian Landing Pads, you'll find all the information online. And I want to tell you a bit about the process here. So what happened was they understood that they need to help the startups become more global. How can they do it? So the government allocated, out of that $1 billion of the national strategy, they allocated $13 million, which they gave to the Australian Trade and Investment Commission to create the Landing Pads program. Now, here's something interesting that also some of you might find relevant, is that the Trade Commission never really worked with startups before, because the regular job of the Australian Trade and Investment Commission was trade and investment. And how do startups fit in there? How, does a team of 3-4 people that maybe raise $500,000 and have a product, how can we help them? So it really made the organization change and think about the future businesses of Australia and how to support them. The program is open until today, going into its 5th year now almost, to companies from all across Australia. So they can be from any sector. They can be in almost any size. We have 5 locations around the world: San Francisco, Shanghai, Singapore, Berlin, and Tel Aviv. The application is done online, and companies need to apply and obviously answer a few of the criteria that the organization decided about, like traction. Do you have traction? It can't just be 2 people with an idea. We want to see something a bit more tangible. Is it something scalable? Can you reach millions or hundreds of millions of users or businesses? Market relevancy, of course. If you're applying to go to San Francisco or Berlin or Tel Aviv, why do you want to go there? Why is this relevant for you? And a few other criteria as we use to assess the companies. And companies who got accepted into the program will receive a 90-day residency. And the deal that the government did is, we will provide you with the local office, which I'll discuss soon in a minute, and a local manager, and the access to all of the information, the networks and whatnot, but you will need to pay for your flight and living expenses. Okay, so the program was not a full kind of like grant where it's like, if we believe you're good, here's money and or here's resources. It's a collaboration between the startups and the government. And I have to share, because I was there, that at the beginning there was a lot of cynicism coming from the innovation community, from startups, about the ability of the government to even support startups in Australia. But slowly over the years, that image really changed, and the startups today in Australia are much more appreciative of the fact that the government is providing them with this opportunity to scale their company globally, using these landing pads in some of the most important locations for technology around the world. And I want to speak about Tel Aviv as an example. The biggest question people used to ask me is, why Tel Aviv? Okay, we understand why a company would want to go to San Francisco, which is the mecca of technology, Silicon Valley and San Francisco, or why go to Shanghai, Singapore, Berlin. These are all massive markets where you can scale your company into. Whereas Israel is a tiny place. The country is the size of New Jersey, only 8 million people. So it's not a market to scale into. But Israel is known as the startup nation, which is a name that came from a book. This is the book. You actually can see the cover of the book here. I really recommend reading this book. It's a great read about the economic miracle of Israel, and kind of like the different elements that came together to create the success of the startup ecosystem in Israel. And the government really adopted this, the Israeli government really adopted this brand, the startup nation. And you could see the prime minister speaking about it all over the world. And it's a very, very funky story that a name of a book became a branding for a country. But there's something behind this. I mean, we're talking, I can go on, we can have a full session just about the startup nation, but really quickly to try and show you some things. Cybersecurity companies. I mean, we're talking generally in Israel about close to 7,000 startups only in Israel, again, in a very small country. Cybersecurity, Israel is a global leader. William mentioned some of the companies in his talk. Over 450 companies, active cybersecurity companies, and account for 20% of the total capital raised. Healthcare, something that, in today's world, in the COVID world, has become so much more important and is getting so much more attention. Healthcare can be telehealth, it can be biomed, but healthcare in general is something that Israel is always very good at. And there are close to 1,200 companies in Israel, which is almost 24% of the total capital raised. Fintech is a funky story because, again, Israel is not a big market. We only have, our banks are not global leaders in banking, but somehow entrepreneurs here, because Israel developed a lot of deep knowledge of technology, were able to take the technology knowledge and adapt it to different sectors. So in financial services, although we're not a big country with a background in this, we're able to grow 500 companies in fintech. And I think probably agtech and food is something that people are very much aware of. Israel invented drip irrigation. It's a country that out of necessity from day one, we had to be an agriculture country. A lot of people around the world grew up eating Jaffa oranges, which actually came through the Jaffa port in Israel. So 680 companies today in agtech, which is amazing. Some of them are the third generation of these founders of the country. The young guys who are now, instead of going into ag, are actually going into ag tech, which is very interesting. But probably the most interesting story is transportation. Why is that? Many of you have heard of the story of Mobileye. Mobileye is an Israeli company. It's a spin-off from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. It was commercialized with Amnon Shashua, the professor behind this idea. And it was purchased a couple of years ago by Intel by $15.3 billion, which is the largest deal in Israel's history. And in total, very, very big deal. And the interesting story about transportation is, again, we were never a country that was good in transportation. We never even made cars. We tried to make one car in the 60s, which failed miserably, compared to countries like Germany, or even in Australia, they used to make cars. But suddenly, because we have this deep knowledge of deep tech, of artificial intelligence, of image recognition, suddenly all of the big car manufacturers, Mercedes-Benz, Renault, Nissan, Mitsubishi, Ford, BMW, General Motors, of course, they all have today R&D centers in Israel, and Israel is a very important player in the global transportation game. And that's the other thing I wanted to talk to you about. And the amazing thing about the Israeli ecosystem and is the open innovation in Israel. So we have close to 536 multinational corporations with a variety of kind of like innovation and R&D offices in Israel. Some of them might be Intel, which has been here for over 40 years with that are one of the largest employers in the country with over 10,000 employees. But some of them can be Enel. Enel is an Italian energy company. It's one of the largest energy companies in the world. And they have only 2 people here in Israel that scout for technologies that are relevant for their business units. So Israel is an amazing place to connect to some of these corporations. And we even say that sometimes if you want to connect to a corporate, even from America, it's actually better to come here and visit them and talk to them than it is in Europe, because they're much more accessible, because Israelis are very, very accessible. I see that I'm running off the limit of my time, so I'm gonna run through to the end of this. Sorry, 1 second. So yeah, so the last thing about the Israeli ecosystem funding, as you can see in this slide, from 2015, I mean, I remember that in 2016, people were saying things are going to slow down with funding for VCs, but we just see it growing and growing and growing. And this year, the first quarter was actually a record quarter with an amount of $2.74 billion in 130 deals raised by companies. This is extraordinary. These numbers are more than sometimes all of Europe together, European startups together, how much money they raised. And it's really extraordinary if you look at the country size and resources. So it really is the startup nation. Why is it the startup nation? And again, this could be a whole nother session we can run for you. But the fact that Israel is an island, it's a geopolitical island. We have no relationship, unfortunately, with our neighbors. Therefore, we have one main entry point into Israel, and it's an island nation. We have no natural resources until a few years ago, when we did discover a bit of gas in the Mediterranean, which we are using. There's no local market. There's mandatory military service, which has a lot of added value it brings for people who want to then go into the startup world, about leadership, about innovation, about working in stressful situations, about it really helped move forward a lot of innovators and founders. It's a country of immigrants, and I don't think I need to elaborate too much about that. There are multiple researchers on how immigrants are leading innovation in their countries. Culture of daring, and of course that's also part to our very short history and friendly neighborhood that we live in. And we believe in daring, and it's something that every Israeli knows. And very good government support. In the early 90s, the Israeli government created a program called the Yozma Group, the Yozma program, which really started the VC business in Israel, as well as support a lot of building of incubators and commercialization programs to really push the innovation forward. And almost 20 years later, we see the result of that amazing program still running today in some of its elements, really, really successful. So all of these are the main reasons for why. And I want to go back to a second to the Australian landing pad. We've had 85 companies visit Tel Aviv, some through the 90 days program residency, and some through a boot camp, we partnered with organizations in Australia like accelerator programs or state governments and say, if you fund the flight and living expenses for your companies to come here, we can build a 10-day program for them. And that's exactly what we've done. The companies that came to Israel received incredible access to all the network we discussed, the VCs, the founders, all the knowledge, introductions to different service providers, really, really active program. They really got to visit, see, talk, and meet with the leaders of the industry here and global leaders that have offices here as well. And we really helped them open the market for them. And the results of the program are pretty amazing. On one side of the spectrum, companies really had a lot of learning and inspiration on what they need to do to build a global company and the mindset they need to have if they want to build a global company. And they really talked about that a few months later after returning to Australia, how it affected the way they see their business. Almost all of them got to validate their product and business model with top-notch industry professionals, which we introduced to them, for many of them for the first time outside of Australia. So they really got a whole fresh new look into their company, into their product. And of course, for some of the companies, there were actual commercial outcomes, partnerships, collaborations, different kind of like R&D opportunities were created. And that was really the main thing of the program. And I want to quickly run one last minute to speak about the different government innovation strategy, which is more corporate support. And here we have an amazing example from SOSA, which we recently signed an agreement with CNI, which is the Brazilian National Confederation of Industry. CNI have a variety of groups that they manage. It's a very strong industrial group in Brazil. But the most important thing, they have almost 1 million members. And the interesting thing about Brazil is that their global innovation index is not so good. They're only in the 64, 69, 70 place in the world in innovation, and they want to change that. They want to change that. And they understood that they need to help support corporations to become more innovative. And hence they created this partnership with SOSA, which will help these corporations scout for relevant technologies for their business, find the right startups that can really help them stay innovative, stay ahead of the game, and not become another Kodak or another Nokia or some of these blockbusters, some of these companies we all grew up on. And we'll have to explain to our kids one day why they didn't survive, because they didn't stay innovative, they didn't think ahead. We are going to support CNI and a variety of corporations that are part of their memberships with these innovation programs in New York and in Tel Aviv. And that's really that. I'm so sorry I had to run through things to finish it. I know I want to be aware of the time we are at, and I want to bring the guy to lead the Q&A.
So thank you, Omri, for the great presentation. And thank you, William, for the insights about the New York tech ecosystem and what's going on in the last few months during the COVID-19. And I'll just mention that the programs that Omri mentioned, it is for the government and cities, but we at SOSA have the expertise that we run it for the Australians, for now for the Brazilians, and we have the programs with the Vizcaya and with the Canadians, and we have some other programs with the Japanese and so on. So I'm inviting all of you to reach out to us if you'd like to hear more and to see how we can support you in New York City. The next slide will have my contact details, so we'll see it soon. And now we have a few minutes for Q&A. And we have one question for William. So I'll ask William the question, and then let's see if we have time for another one. So the question is, you discussed, William, many later stages, well-established companies. What do you think the future has in store for smaller, early-stage startups? Is it feasible to raise capital without having revenue, proven business model? Are startups seeking to raise seed, pre-seed doomed? Are VCs taking risks of this kind? If you can answer all of this in shortly, as we have limited time.
Sure. I think what I'm getting from the question is, who's getting funding? And is it really only growth stage companies right now that are proven in their business model? Are early stage companies getting funding? And I think what you can see from some of the data that I presented is that VCs are more cautious today than they were 6 months ago. They're not writing checks based on a business model with no proven traction or revenue. They need to see first and foremost that the business model can survive in today's environment. There's no pitch now that's being taken seriously that says we'll be doing well when this is over or when we go back to normal, because VCs are not thinking that way. They're thinking, if I write you a check, you have to be able to exist in today's environment. And so that can be one of two things. One, it's growth stage capital, that's business model is actually well positioned to take advantage of today's reality. The companies like we saw, companies helping in customer service, companies helping in data management, companies helping cities, improve transportation and infrastructure related to the virus. So, those are big companies getting funding. On the early stage side, I think we see a mix of companies that are directly applicable to the current situation that could scale basically as a result of the new reality. And we also see some bets on some companies that, can survive now and adapt and be a part of the current market, but for whom we are betting a little bit on the idea that we will return somehow back to normal. So I think it's a mix. I think just if you're a young startup pitching a VC today, you have to be aware of how your pitch resonates with an audience that doesn't want to hear about the future, but instead wants to hear about what you're doing now. And I think it is possible to raise capital. I hope that answers the question, Guy.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great answer. And I think we have time for another one question, as we have like 1 minute left. And this question, I will direct it to Omri. So Omri, you presented the Australian Land Pen and CNI, two strategies that governments are taking to promote their innovation. So while we are facing a global crisis, and my question to you, based on what we received, it's, are governments allocating money for these kinds of initiative, or do you see that these projects have been frozen? What do you see from your experience and the entities that you are working with?
Yeah, well, it's a very interesting question. Unfortunately, I don't think there's one answer for that. I think that currently there is a lot of unknown in the world, right? And everyone says the first thing to get hurt, is innovation. But in reality, what we see is actually the opposite. I think also from my conversations with my colleagues and with other trade commissioners around the world, they understand that actually now, because of what's happening, now is the best time for governments to invest more in innovation, whether they want to help the startups, whether they want to help corporates stay innovative, because, now when there's unknown, you want to help these people create more jobs, stay more innovative, and stay ahead of the game. And I think that maybe there's a bit of a slowdown, because right now people are dealing with very heavy issues in their own countries. But I know that there are a lot of conversations and talks about it. And I know that many governments are planning to adjust their budget and provide a lot of support for innovation, with whatever strategy they choose, because they understand it is the future of their economy.
Right. Okay, thank you, Omri. And what we see also in New York City is that the local, trade commissions still want to support their entrepreneurs, and they still have their KPIs and they want to support them. So there are some funding to that as well in supporting them in the go-to-market, which is the US. And we see it from different entities that we are talking with. So with that, we will finish. I'm inviting all of you, if you'd like to hear more about what we are doing, and you'd like to hear more about what's happening in the New York tech ecosystem, and to get some advice or to build together something together, feel free to reach out to me, Guy, G-U-Y, at sosa.co. And it's .co. Always I get the question if it's not a mistake and it's .com. No, it's .co. So Guy at sosa.co. So thank you everyone for joining us, and thank you for the FTCA and Dan for partnering with us, and enjoy the rest of the day, and stay safe and healthy. Thank you.